All right. So here we are with the third edition of Open Mic. And of course, I'm Michael Howe. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the Central Washington Home Builders Association. And once a month, we like to bring guests on to talk about policy or legislative issues that are important to the membership. And very pleased to have Todd Myers with us today. I'll give a brief intro from his bio off of the Policy Center website, and then Todd, you can add whatever you want or delete things if you want. We have Todd Myers here. He's the director of the Center for the Environment at the Washington Policy Center. He's one of the nation's leading experts on free market environmental policy, and that's no joke right there. Leading experts, absolutely. He's the author of the landmark 2011 book, Eco-Fads, How the Rise of Trendy Environmentalism is Harming the Environment. He was a Wall Street Journal expert panelist for energy and the environment. Authored a number of studies. One of the more interesting ones for our membership is his in-depth research on the failure of the state's 2005 green building mandate, which continues to receive national attention. Be cool, Todd, if you could comment on that briefly.
Yep. Okay.
And, your past jobs, quite frankly, excite me. The Director of Public Affairs for the Seattle Mariners, Director of Public Relations for the Supersonics. Would have been a great year this year to be with the Mariners, quite frankly.
I was there in '97 when we went to the playoffs. And,
all right.
And finally, this year is it's been a long time since having worked for the Mariners was a cool thing. So
yeah, well, this is definitely a cool time to do that if when we're doing that. So, Todd, wanted to talk to you about a couple of issues, and one that I wasn't going to talk to you about, but because of a recent court decision, it's kind of top of the mind for our membership right now. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the culvert decision that the Supreme Court came down with. Well, it was a 4-4 tie, and essentially affirmed a lower court decision.
Right. So it let stand a Ninth Circuit Court ruling. So what the decision is, and this stems out of the Bolt decision. So the Bolt decision initially was that tribes, due to treaty rights, have the rights to about half of the catch of fish in Washington state. And so what this decision says is that right is meaningless if there are no fish to catch. What the decision said is that there are these culverts that block habitat, that are basically blocking streams, and there's a lot of habitat upstream that the fish can't get to, that is suppressing fish populations. So what they sued is to say, well, state of Washington, you've got to fix these because we need to increase populations. So there has been debate about whether the treaty right actually gives them that right, whether it obliges the taxpayers of the state of Washington to fix culverts and other things like that to improve salmon populations. The Ninth Circuit ruled yes. The Supreme Court, in a 4-4 decision, since Justice Kennedy recused himself because he had been involved in this case a long, long time ago, literally decades ago. So it was 4-4, so it stands. So there are a couple of concerns. One, obviously, is that the definition of what the treaty right covers is expanding. So now it's not just you get to catch half of what's out there. It's now the treaty right says that we have to ensure that there are enough out there. And while the Ninth Circuit purportedly wrote it narrowly to focus just on culverts, there's no reason that this couldn't be applied in all sorts of other areas. The same logic, just changing the word culvert to something else. Those cases may have to be litigated, will have to be litigated, obviously. But that's the fear is that this won't just be about fixing culverts. It will be about all sorts of other things that, anything that affects salmon, and everything affects salmon, right? Land use,
right.
Stormwater, agricultural practices, everything can ultimately affect salmon. And so that's the concern, is that this could get out of control very rapidly.
So you just listed a number of things that should have the membership of my association and other home building associations quite concerned about this decision, because you listed stormwater and other land use things. Is this something we need to watch closely? Is this something that we can have an impact on, and if so, how?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is going to manifest itself not just at the state level and fixing culverts. The Department of Transportation is the primary culprit here in failing to fix culverts, and so they're now going to have to go fix these. They've been doing it at a slow rate for some time. Now, to be clear, there is merit in fixing culverts to save salmon, because if there's a lot of habitat upstream and you have a blockage, opening that habitat can be helpful. So it's so often in government policies, we focus on things that look good but don't actually do much. This actually, not every culvert, but a lot of culverts can actually help. So this isn't meaningless. But the question is, if you then expand that to all sorts of other areas, it's not just state of Washington, it is every county, it is every city, and all of those jurisdictions that potentially have an impact on culverts. And if the tribes choose to say, hey, we don't like this practice, we're going to sue, then everybody can be affected. So I think that's the real concern. What's interesting, though, is I think there's a lesson about free market economics and free market environmentalism here. The one area that they have done a good job of fixing culverts is on forest lands, private forest lands especially. They were supposed to fix their culverts by 2015, and basically private forest landowners across the state achieved that goal because they had revenue coming from timber harvests to pay for it.
Right.
Wait for politicians to, spend the money. They got all sorts of other projects. They got all sorts of other priorities, and we haven't spent the money there. But where you have good economics and a good stream of revenue, it's good for the environment. So I think the lesson that we should take away from this is that government has failed where business has succeeded in fixing these. And that, I think, is a model that we need to use not just here, but in other places as well.
Absolutely. So any idea how the state's going to pay for this, or what kind of cost this might have, actual dollar numbers?
Well, the estimate is about $1.8 billion, and we all know that government estimates are always accurate. My guess is it's going to cost more than that. The way I put it, though, is that that's just a couple of Sound Transit cost overruns.
Yeah, no, that's true.
So it's $1.8 billion is a lot of money, and it's going to come from somewhere, and people are going to want to either raise taxes for it, or they're going to want to cannibalize other programs. So it's going to be a big chunk. The question is, what's the timeline, right? This isn't going to be done next year. This isn't going to probably be done in 5 years. So how long a process this is questionable. Previously, the state had said that it would finish fixing these in 2050. That timeline is probably not going to be acceptable to the tribes. But again, it's not going to be even 5 years. It's going to be somewhere down the road.
It just amazes me the amount of money we spend on fish and wildlife mitigation. As you know, in my previous life, I was a government affairs director for a public utility district and focused a lot on the Bonneville Power Administration and various other things. And about a third of our wholesale cost went to fish and wildlife mitigation, largely all about saving the salmon.
Right.
So it just amazes me how that cost continues to rise and we get impacted over and over. The salmon are important, of course, and we want to do what we can there.
Yeah, so, and I will say the frustrating thing about that, so I'm on the Puget Sound Salmon Recovery Council and focusing on what projects we should be doing, what are our priorities. And too often the priorities we set, or politicians set, I should say, are things that feel good and look good, not where there's most effective.
Right.
And I can name for you a whole number of projects where we have spent money that did almost nothing for salmon and steelhead, but were very trendy and sounded good. That, I think, is the biggest frustration. The frustration about spending money on salmon, it doesn't mean we don't care about salmon. It just means we want to spend our money wisely. And there is a sense, understandable, and one that I share, that the money that we spent isn't achieving the goal. So that, I think, is where we really need to focus on, rather than sounding like, the salmon, they cost too much. It is the things that we're doing are not the right things or not the best things. I think that there's a lot of area that we can make improvements there, that recognizes that we care about salmon, both for sport fishing, both for commercial, and just because salmon, we want to have salmon in Washington State, part of who we are, but we don't want to just throw money overboard, sort of pretending that we care about the issue or trying to look like we care about the issue.
All right. Well, thanks for the update on that. Let's switch gears now. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, it looks like in the November election, voters are going to get an opportunity again to talk to decide if we want a carbon tax or not.
Yeah.
One, I'm curious if you agree that it's going to end up on the ballot, and two, what that means for us.
Yeah, I think it's almost certainly going to end up on the ballot. So it's Initiative 1361. The environmental community is collecting signatures now to put it on for November. They have a huge pot of money. I think it would be a shock if they weren't able to get it on the ballot because they're paying a lot of money. So we're going to see it. So the carbon tax is about $500 million. It starts out about $500 million tax. That the way that translates is that it is a 15 cent a gallon tax, and it goes up by 2 cents a gallon every year plus inflation. So that means about after 10 years, it'll be about 40 cents a gallon is what it'll end up. But it will also hit home heating, natural gas, and then some electricity. Electricity is not very much, right? We have a lot of hydro, we have a lot of nuclear, so there's not a lot of carbon there. So where you really see it is at the gas pump and in your home heating bill. We estimate that to start that it will be about $260 a household for a two-car household, typically going up to over $700 after the end of a decade. So that's what you're going to be facing. And then the money, that money is spent by a board it's unelected. There are no elected officials on it. It's appointed by the governor, and then they get to spend the money the way they want. There's a list of things that are recommendations to spend the money on, but there is a key line in the initiative that says that the board can spend the money on anything that they feel is consistent with the goals of the initiative. So,
wow,
they really, I won't say they have carte blanche, but they have really wide latitude to do some things.
Yeah, that's a lot of leeway right there.
Yes. And the other thing that's frustrating is that there are no metrics, right? They don't say, okay, if we're going to give a grant, we have to achieve this level of carbon reduction. They have these sort of general goals that say, okay, here are the goals that we're trying to meet. But on a case-by-case basis, none of the projects have to meet those goals or metrics. And what's worse is that if they don't meet the goals of the initiative, the taxes increase. Wow. So if they fail, we pay. And none of the members, right? There's no clause that says, look, if you fail, you get kicked off the board or anything else. Their failure costs us more. So it's really, I think, reckless the way this is done. And what it shows is that this is more about taxation and government expansion and giving money to special interest groups than it is about setting real goals and metrics for reducing carbon emissions.
Right. And the title of the initiative is a little bit misleading. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
It says the word tax in it at all. I think a mutual friend of ours, Glenn Morgan, tried to get that changed to be more transparent and actually say what it was. But it's kind of misleading. Is it... What you anticipate? I mean, the last carbon tax initiative kind of failed miserably. This one, does it have some momentum, you think?
So what you're referring to is that it's not called a carbon tax in the title. It's called a pollution fee. If you look at the language, though, it is virtually identical to the governor's carbon tax.
Right.
Environmental community called a carbon tax. And the environmental community is out there saying, hey, it's great that it's not called a tax because that polls better. Even they admit tax, and this is just a tactic to try to sort of fool the voters into voting for this. They also say it's a tax on big polluters. But that's not true. The tax is paid at the gas pump by people, by everybody. So, and they admit that too. So they play a lot of word games because they don't want people to know what's really going on here.
Right.
So
right.
that's kind of that's the initiative. So the question is, okay, so will it pass? The initiative 2 years ago was actually very interesting because it was revenue neutral, and actually the state actually ruled it a slight tax cut, because although it raised carbon taxes, it cut sales and business taxes. So it cut sales taxes a full percent. And what the state said is that the tax cuts are larger than the tax increases. Now, that's not true for every person, right? Some people would actually pay a little bit more, and some businesses like pulp and paper would pay more. A lot of households would have paid less, however. This doesn't even try to do that. There's no tax cuts in this. This is a pure tax increase, an expansion of government, more money for special interests. There are numerous places where it says, the tribes get 10%, these groups get 10%. And so they actually list a number of special interests that are guaranteed money. And what's even worse is that they have what's called the Environmental and Economic Justice Panel. And they get to decide where some of the money is spent, and they also get to determine whether other expenditures that others determine are suitable. But there's a clause in there that says that the Environmental and Economic Justice Panel can award the members of the panel, their groups, money. So you can sit on the board and then say, we should get $1 million grant for what we're doing. So, I think there's some really questionable ethical issues, not just in how the money is spent and whether it be effective, but, you're basically giving yourself money.
Right.
And I think it would be very surprising if almost every member of the Economic and Environmental Justice Panel didn't walk away with money in their pocket.
Wow. Goodness gracious. Yeah, you mentioned the tax. It's a tax on not just households, but small businesses. I'm thinking of my members who, to get to job sites, they have to drive there and haul things. It's going to come on so many different discussions regarding affordable housing. This is just going to add to the cost.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a number of industries that are exempted, and what they'll say is, it doesn't apply to what are called energy-intensive trade-exposed industries like aluminum and concrete and things like that. But of course, that's only direct expenditures. There's a lot of indirect expenditures that people have where they're going to pay the costs. And a lot of the industries you're talking about, your industry is not exempted. So, so the costs associated with this for fuel and other things like that, you're going to end up having to pay. So yes, it will increase the costs of a lot of things.
Right.
So, and of course, what they'll say is, no, they're exempted or they're exempted or they're exempted. You can't raise $500 million in taxes if everyone's exempted.
True.
They're going to pretend that nobody pays, but the $500 million comes from somewhere, and it's all of us.
All right. And to wrap this up, Todd, because I know you got to go and I got to go, but I wanted to go back to your bio momentarily. Todd's in-depth research on the failure of the state's 2005 green building mandate continues to receive national attention. Can you just touch on that a bit? The green building mandate and what kind of attention you're still getting?
Yeah. So over a decade ago, Washington State required that all schools be built to what are called green building standards, which you folks are probably very familiar with. The most common one is LEED, but there are other ones. And the state said, where practicable, whatever that means, schools have to build to LEED or what's called a high performance building standard. So when they were pushing this, I was wondering, okay, how effective are these? Because they obviously cost more. You don't mandate something that doesn't cost more. So they said, this school in Tacoma is actually already saving 30% in energy costs just from building to these standards. Well, 30% is a lot, right? If you can do something that saves you 30%, you're probably already doing it. And so I'm always skeptical when I hear people say, for doing almost nothing, you can save a lot of money. Because your members and other folks are not stupid, right? They're not just going to walk away from saving. So I went and pulled the utility bills for that school. And the beauty is that 2 middle schools were built in Tacoma in the same year, one with the green building standards and one without. The building without the green building standards was 30% more efficient per square foot.
Oh, wow.
Than the green school. The green school was using more energy, by significantly more energy than the non-green school. So I pointed this out in the hearing. The architect came up and said, yeah, we know. We looked at that. We fixed it. We put in some wrong equipment and it's fixed now and it's going to be better next year. So the legislature said, okay, well, we trust you. And so they passed the law. So a year later, I went back and pulled the data again. Because I have a long memory and because I'm vindictive. And they were right. The green school had gotten better. It was now only 25% less efficient than the non-green school. And then the next year I went again and it was back up to 30%. So it never actually got any better. So I wanted to see if this was universal. And I went to a number of school districts, like Washington School District, Bethel School District, Spokane, elsewhere. And what I found was that consistently the green schools used more energy per square foot than the non-green schools. And it wasn't unusual to find green schools using about 30% more energy than the best non-green school built about the same time. So I did this in Washington. I've done it in Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, North Carolina, Ohio, and I find this everywhere, that the LEED system simply does not perform the way it is promised. You end up spending a lot more money and getting poor results. And I'll just add one last story, which is that in New Mexico, in the Santa Fe School District, the facilities director is really fantastic there. She built a LEED school. And I called her, I said, congratulations, you've built the only LEED school I found in the country that is the most efficient school in the district. And she said, thank you. Yeah, we paid a lot of attention to it, but we're building another school now that's even more efficient. We built another school that's even more efficient, than we didn't use LEED because we took the things that we liked from LEED and ignored the things that we didn't. So even in her situation where she was able to make the LEED system work, she found that it wasn't worthwhile and built her next school without it and still did better. So those are the sorts of standards that those are the sorts of eco-fads, as you mentioned in my book, that I find all over the place. And I got a very nice email from a school facilities director in Nevada saying, thank you. You know, when you criticize somebody's schools, you don't expect them to be happy about it. But I got an email from a facilities director who said, thank you so much for highlighting this. We have been trying to tell the school board that these are not worth it, and they won't listen to us.
Wow.
The facilities directors, builders, other folks, they know what they're doing. If you tell them, I want an efficient building, they can tell you how to do it. But meeting a cookie cutter approach is typically not a good way to do it. And the reason that the school boards do it is they want a plaque on the wall because they want to look green. And that's what LEED confers. LEED gives them ability to appear green, even if it costs more and saves less.
All right, Todd. Well, with that, I appreciate you sharing that. We'll wrap this up now. Again, this is Todd Myers. He's the director of the Center for the Environment at Washington Policy Center. You do a lot of great work. I love reading your stuff. Where can my members go find that? On the Washington Policy website?
Right. So just washingtonpolicy.org is our webpage. We have a blog there where we keep up to date on the issues of the day. I just did a piece last week about Initiative 1361, the carbon tax. And so you can see that. We'll be doing lots of stuff on that and other issues this year. We write policy notes and analysis. And the other thing I'll ask is that for your members, is a lot of the information that I get about what's going on in Washington State, the problems I get from people out in the field who see it, firsthand. So if your folks have ideas or things that they think we should be looking at, please contact us because that's where I get a lot of good tips.
Absolutely. And just so you know, I share your work from time to time when it seems to fit the industry within our newsletters and that type of thing. So thanks again, Todd. I appreciate it and appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Thanks, Todd.